Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first online lecture. I'm saying that in quotes, in an attempt to make these a lot faster and a lot less boring, but also at your own pace. I wanted to make this lecture online so you can watch and pause anytime you need to when you're taking notes. Definitely, you need to be taking notes during this and any of these lectures because I will be checking tomorrow to make sure you have everything, and more than likely we will have a quiz. You know, pop-up quizzes are an option for anything at any time. This is going to be one of those. So, without further ado, let's get into the Puritans, one of our first units. When we talk about the Puritans, we're talking about the first group of people to come to America. This is the first group of white people from Europe. And Puritans is a broad term referring to a number of Protestant groups that sought to purify the Church of England. They left England because they saw issues with the church and they wanted more purity rather than the chaos and conflicts that were being caused in the Church of England. They wanted simpler forms of worship. For them, religion was first personal and an inner experience, and they didn't believe the clergy or the government should act as God's voice. They didn't believe in a king who said he was chosen by God, and they didn't think one person should act as God. Many suffered persecution in England when they said that they would go against the church. They were then saying they were going against the king, which was treason. So many were put in jail, many were whipped, and this one's super gross, so I put it in here. Their noses got slit. So imagine not just your nose being cut off, but just like a slit in your nose that you have to live with. They left so they would no longer have to worry about their own beliefs or safety. So what were their beliefs? At the center of Puritan beliefs was an uneasy mixture of certainty and doubt. They were certain that Adam and Eve, which in the Bible is the first two humans on earth according to Christian religion, they were certain that Adam and Eve damned humanity, meaning that they were the first two to sin and that damned humanity for good. But they had a doubt that God was unforgiving. So they know all humans are sinners, but they also think maybe God's nice, but they're not sure. So they're very doubtful and uncertain. How did you know if you were saved or damned? They grappled with this question constantly. And it wasn't a guarantee, like in some religions, it wasn't a guarantee if you believe in Jesus that you would be saved, or if you do good works that you will be saved. What happens if you are a saved individual, and this is really important, so make sure you write this down. A saved individual was a member of the elect. A damned individual was a member of the unregenerate. And how do you become saved or elect? Well, you had to be able to feel God's presence or God's grace through the intense emotion in your soul. So you had to be able to feel God's presence. And the inner arrival of God's grace was demonstrated outwardly. So you feel God inside of your heart and your soul, and then you're doing good works to the people. And to show those outwardly good works, the Puritans valued four things: self-reliance, industriousness, temperance, and simplicity. And you'll notice those two principal identifiers of being an elect are very fuzzy. How do you know someone's feeling God's grace in their heart unless they just tell you, and how do you believe them? So there was a lot of conflict in that idea, or how can someone be saved, and you can probably guess the problems that are going to be created from that. So here's the four beliefs with their definitions. The Puritan values self-reliance. You rely on yourself. You rely on your own powers and resources. You don't need other people. Number two is industriousness. And think of industry. That means diligent and hard work. You work very hard and you stay focused on your work. Number three is temperance, which temperance means it's self-restraint in food and drinking, mostly restraining from alcohol. So they do not drink, they don't eat anything unhealthy, they don't eat too much, they always are restraining themselves from anything that's too much. And simplicity, not needing or wanting extravagances that are unnecessary to survival. They don't need an extra pair of shoes. They don't need a new iPhone case. This is the 1700s, so they don't have that. But they don't need anything extra, and they're not supposed to want it either. So we're going to think about the idea that we talked about in class of the American dream. How do the values of self-reliance, temperance, industriousness, and simplicity relate to our definition of the American dream? And this is the definition that was written down for us. We know that's been changed a little as time has gone on, but how does it relate to the American dream? I want you to pause right here and answer this question. Once you've written a sentence or two answering it, then keep going with me. So politics. There's a lot of politics that comes with Puritan culture because the Puritans mixed religion into their politics, and their religion, as you can see, is fairly fuzzy in some places. Puritans viewed a covenant or a contract existed between God and humanity. So they have a contract with God, and they have to follow him, and always everything they do has to be focused on God. Not just internally, like a lot of people who are religious now, but they need to be talking about God, making their actions very, very clear for how they connect to God, and make sure they're always focusing on those 4 core values of self-reliance, industriousness, temperance, and simplicity. They made the Mayflower Compact, which was a document created and signed to show how they would put God first in the governing of their new home in America. This isn't just a promise between one person and God, like again modern religion has, but this is a promise that their entire government is based around God, which you may think is not quite different from the Church of England that they all decided to leave, and you'd be right. However, they also believed the elect, so those people who are saved, should have the most power in the government. And once again, remember that the elect are chosen because they feel God's presence inside of them and they do outward works for God. But how do you prove that they feel God? So you can see that there's going to be a lot of conflict between everyone's going to want to be a member of the elect, and the elect are going to be the ones passing all the laws for the government. The elect's views tended to be undemocratic and had little room for compromise. Once you were chosen to be an elect, these people often would kind of break those 4 Puritan values. They'd pretend to be self-reliant, but they had more servants. They'd pretend to restrain themselves when eating or drinking, but they often did not. They were the ones who were the biggest hypocrites. The Bible in America, of course, to Puritans, the Bible was very, very important, and they read the book very, very literally. The Puritans read the Bible as the story of creation, the fall, the wanderings, and the rescue of the human race. So all humanity is explained in the Bible. Within this long and complex narrative, each Puritan could see connections to the events in his or her own life. Everything we do, everything the Puritans did, had to be connected to God. The Puritans believed that the Bible was the literal word of God, so God spoke the words in the Bible and they were written down. It was a necessity for all Puritans to understand it, debate it, and read it regularly. And because of the importance of the Bible, they put a strong emphasis on education, which this is interesting. Puritans founded Harvard. So in order to read a book as complex as the Bible or any religious text, if you've seen it, you have to be very, very well educated. It's a hard book to understand. And so Puritans are one of the first groups of people who put an emphasis on education and the written language. You'll also see in that second bullet point that Puritans needed to connect the events to his or her own life to the Bible. So every step they took had to be explained. Why were they walking to the market, or why were they weeding in front of their house if that's one of God's plants? Every single thing they did, who they chose to marry, when they chose to have kids, had to be explained by the Bible. So they had to have so many passages memorized that they could explain it if ever asked or questioned. Their beliefs required them to keep a close watch on both their spiritual and public lives. They needed to always be ready to defend themselves because this is a highly, highly critical society. Characteristics of Puritan writing. So the Bible was the largest body of work that the Puritans read and used, and they used that as a symbol for their writing, or a model for their writing. They viewed each individual life as a journey to salvation. They looked for direct connections between biblical events and events in their own lives, like I said in the last slide. And you're going to notice when we read Puritan writing, a lot of students find it difficult because it sounds like a really, really old text. They're not working on sounding more modern. They're working to sound like the Bible, which makes it difficult to read, but we'll do that part together. Diaries and histories were the most common form of literary expression in Puritan society. In them, writers described the workings of God. So everything you read by a Puritan is going to be about God and how God is connected in their lives. And you're mostly going to be reading diaries, so like people's personal diaries, and the histories of where they came from. Sometimes, and we will read a little bit of poetry, but for the most part, you're just going to read diaries. Puritans favored a plain style of writing. Like I said, they admired clarity of expression and avoided complicated figures of speech. You don't see a lot of metaphors or a lot of similes or symbolism. They kind of say it like it is, but again, it's an old style of writing, so it's not necessarily easy to read. But that's why we're going to do it together. So what we're going to read and what we'll be working on tomorrow is a poem by Anne Bradstreet. And just so you get an idea of what's going on tomorrow, you don't have to do anything with this today, and you don't have to write down anything in this slide, but we're going to be reading the poem A Few Verses Upon the Burning of Our House, and we're going to look at how that poem shows Puritan values and techniques. You're not doing it alone. And it's not that hard to do because there's 4 Puritan values. But just so you know what we're doing tomorrow, we'll be in groups. We'll be working together. We're going to read our first short but big Puritan work and figure out a little bit more about these Puritans. Thanks, guys. I hope you have a great night, and I will see you all tomorrow. Again, make sure if you did not take back notes, you go back and take notes about these. Just jot several things down. Notes help them stick in your brain. And then if you're someone who needs to study a little bit before a quiz, make sure you get those main points down, the ones that are bold or in a larger font, or the things that I'll ask you about. Have a great night, guys, and I will see you all tomorrow.